The thing that you probably need to know about me is that I started my career in development, and I actually loved it. I love development. I got drafted into management pretty early in my career just because I was in a growing company. They needed, people to take on teams. And initially it was a bit of a challenge, but then I learned that I actually liked it, the combination of technical and the people side of it. And as I got more into understanding, the software development process, things kept coming back to quality, because it seemed like if you didn't pay attention to quality, it was always bogging you down. You paid for it later. So I got more and more interested in it. And it sort of culminated when I went to a startup and I was an architect there, and I said, okay, this is my chance. We're going to do things right, from the beginning on the development side so that quality is built in from the beginning and it's all great, So I worked with, there were two other architects. We kind of agreed, hey, this is the way we're going to do it. We're going to use all these best practices and we're going to get great quality. And, I myself did a bunch of the early code for the product and we got all done. And the other guys, the other two architects said, gosh, your code doesn't have bugs in it. And I said, well, it's because I followed these practices. Did you guys do that? Well, kind of. Like, well, wait, we agreed we were going to do this stuff, right? Yeah, it's great. It's great stuff, and we're glad you did it. Like, okay, well, if it's great stuff, you did it too, right? No. Well, but now that you see it works, your stuff has bugs and mine didn't, you'll do it the next time, right? Well, no. So I had a good enough relationship with these guys, like, okay, I got to understand why you don't want to do this. And ultimately what I concluded is it's a personality thing. So, people have the same technical skills, but they have different personalities, and they tend to gravitate to different parts of the organization that have different sort of primary demands, I guess, on you from a personality standpoint, like, delayed gratification and sort of how meticulous you are and, that kind of thing. And so I realized, wait, I belong in QA. I've got that personality, so I made the jump, and I've been like director in QA for, about 12 years now. And every year that goes by, I get more passionate about it. So software quality and the software development process are, what I've been really fascinated with for a long time. Really the thing that I wanted to talk about isn't 100% specific to Agile. Getting back to that whole personality thing, and you can work in a technical field, but you're still working with people all day, and the organizational dynamics that go on. QA is in an interesting spot. We always sort of bring bad news, or we're always the reason why things can't get done, or it's all these negative kind of things that can, if you're not careful, start to define the QA team and the people in it. So. But having said that, I think that Agile has taken hold. It's shifted things a little bit in some good ways, and then it's presented also some new challenges, about this whole thing of what does success mean for a QA team? And it's important to understand that both for the people doing QA, so you know what you're shooting at, but then also for the rest of the organization, so that you're in sync, that, hey, if we do this, you're going to think we're successful, right? I mean, that's always a good thing to know in an organization. So that's really what I wanted to talk about. And before we do that, well, let me just say a couple things about how I want to talk about it, because I'm not the type that so much likes to lecture about stuff. I've been doing this a long time, and one of the things I think that really is exciting to me about QA is I don't think any of us have all the answers. It's constantly evolving, and we're constantly learning things, almost more so than the development side, I think. So what I say is I don't have all the answers, but I've got some really, really good questions, that are hopefully thought-provoking and stimulate some good discussion. So what I really want to do is have this be a dynamic discussion and very interactive. And so to kind of just kick that off, I thought it'd be fun to do a little thought experiment, I call it. Not related to the identity of QA, but it's a QA question. I think it's, the reason I like this is because sometimes gets people to turn things around and look at them in a different way. So here's a completely hypothetical situation. You have a development team, they implement some new function, and the rules of the game are you get 6 builds and then you've got to ship. And furthermore, in those 6 builds, for 5 of them, you can pick 20% of your test cases and run them for each one, any 20% that you want. And in the other one, you can run 100% of your test cases. Totally artificial situation. But if you're constrained that way, the question is, which of the 6 test passes would you do the 100%? Now, there's no right answer here. This is not a quiz, okay? So let's just take a quick poll. I'll just do it on the board. We'll just go around. I know you're not have a lot of time to think about it, but so 1 through 6, which one is the 100% test pass?
700. Sorry, 700.
No, so the question is you got 6 different test passes, and 5 out of the 6 are going to be you run 20% of your test cases, however many there are for the function, right? And then in one of the test passes, you can run all 100% of your test cases. So this is just which of the 6 in sequential order. Maybe I should clarify. So every time you do a test pass, you run whatever test you're running, generate some bugs, get some fixes, do another build, and then you run the next test pass. So
I think the first one.
first one, okay. Number 1, there's 1 vote. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay. 5, okay. 5. 6, okay. 5.
1.
1, okay.
6.
6.
Which has most critical bugs in it?
Don't know. This is,
Okay.
yeah, so this is kind of, imagine, so think of it this way. Ahead of time, you've got to make this plan and be locked into it. So you're kind of projecting maybe. If that's your question, then you just have to take your best guess.
Okay. So 5.
Okay.
I'd probably say 5 too.
5, okay.
I go 5.
5.
5 again.
5 again. All right. So what I will say about this, I've done this with a number of groups. This is very, very typical kind of pattern, except what I will say, and again, there's not a right answer here. Usually you'll get a little more of people saying 1. Okay. Now, there's a second part to this. Shift it up and imagine that magically, before you get each build, you somehow magically know what all the bugs are. So you have to run some tests, but now the reason you have to run the test because you know where all the bugs are, but nobody believes you unless you actually run a test that fails. Okay. So now, if that was the situation, what would you do?
Sorry, let me try and clarify.
Mm-hmm.
Before I run the test suite for each of these bins,
Yep.
I magically know what failures it will generate.
Yep. So here's,
Is that a fair restatement?
yeah. So in test pass 1, here comes the build, and you go, oh, wow, that's weird. I just somehow magically know where all the bugs are.
Like you have a QA genie or something.
Yeah. You know, I call it the omniscient tester. You're the omniscient tester, and somehow you just know, right? So after this one, then you say, okay, well, now, unfortunately, if it's going to take you more than 20% of the test cases to demonstrate all those bugs, you could be in a pickle, right?
I see. So you know all the bugs in the system, not just the ones that will be generated by your test.
That too, right? So then, you know, whatever ones you report, they get fixed. Now, they could cause regressions. They might not fix the bug they were intended to fix, you know. But there isn't other change going on in the code. So think of it that way.
So not to put too fine a point on it.
Uh-huh.
I know the bugs in the code by magic. Now, if I have 20% of my test cases, can I cleverly select those?
Yep.
Oh,
You could pick whichever 20% you want. So you'll see why I'm doing this in a minute. So we'll go around again and see if that, you know, whatever you said the first time, you know, this is a different situation. So which one would be the 100% of the test cases you would run?
Number 3 perhaps.
3? Okay. 4, okay.
Staying with 5.
Okay, that's fine.
I still like 6.
6,
Stick with 5 again.
okay.
Still 1.
Still 1, okay.
6.
6.
5.
So a lot of people staying with what they originally said.
I'm going to change to 1.
Okay.
I'm proud.
3?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll say 2. Look slowly. Okay.
Wow. Okay, I've never had this kind of result, I will say, in terms of the relationship of the second question to the first. I'll tell you what I would do in this case. I can make a lot of arguments for actually these 3. Any of these 3, I think you can make a good convincing argument for in this scenario. And it depends kind of on your experience with the software and how it tends to behave and what breaks and all that kind of thing. I would say 6 here, and here's why. You'll be able to find and fix all the bugs doing the 20% of the code, but the last one you want to run 100% to show there aren't any. In other words, all 100% should pass in this one, the last one before you ship, right? So the reason I like to think about this, there's 2. One is there's really 2 very different reasons that you test code. One is to find bugs, and one is to show there aren't any. And the second thing I like about this is that the question you might want to ask yourself is, am I closer to this or am I closer to this? Do I know nothing about where the bugs are or make some guesses, or do I know a lot about where the bugs might be? Because I think a lot of quality engineers underestimate their own skills. And what I found is people are a lot closer to this than they are to this. They actually have a pretty good insights as to where the bugs might be and where you can focus your testing. So particularly in, this goes back a ways, but when there was a lot of manual testing, I would tell people, don't run stuff you think is going to pass early on. Don't bother. Run tests where you think it's going to break for a while, and then the hope is back here you want to run all the tests to make sure you didn't miss anything. Now, the reason I think 5 is a good answer here, I think people are thinking along the same lines. Well, we'll hopefully catch stuff through here, but by this time we better really make sure and then leave ourselves one build to fix stuff that got through, right? So, which makes a lot of sense. But if you really know, I'm going to know where all the bugs are here and we're getting them all fixed, then basically what I'm doing here is just proving to everybody there's no bugs left.
But what if they're not from N6?
If you're omniscient, right? So the possibility would be that you fixed a bunch here and there was a regression.
There's the last chance for 6.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
So worst case, you say, oh, well, we're not going to ship. We were supposed to, but if it's really broken, at least we know we shouldn't ship, right? We shouldn't go live. Yeah. So my blog is actually called The Omniscient Tester. And the reason I call it that is because I call it testing without the blinders, because, you know, use what you know more than you probably do. This comes up in a lot of ways. So I've actually had, I worked at one company where they would keep statistics on what percentage of the tests pass in each build, and they wanted to see that number go up fast and then keep going up, right? So everybody would go, great, oh, I'm going to go run all the tests I know are going to pass. Well, that's stupid. Developers are sitting on their hands in the meantime, right? They need bugs to fix. So if you think about this, like what's going to get us to done as fast as possible, and how can we use the knowledge we have smartest? You know, that it comes up in other ways. What automated tests do I need to update first? Like some broke because the code changed, whatever. Like the ones that I think aren't going to fail, don't bother. Don't fix them right away. Start running ones that you think are going to fail. Get the developers busy, right? Then come back to it. So now, the other thing about this, let me come back in just a second, is that, so I'm coming at this from a management perspective, QA management. Management tends to screw up QA engineers just in any number of ways, and it's usually by the metrics that you go by. The example I just gave, oh, we want to see the pass rate go up as fast as possible. Well, that's just the worst thing you could do. Or, oh, we like it when you find, you know, tons of bugs. Well, guess what? You're going to go find all the little nitty things that are easy to catch, right? You really want to find the ones that are going to take a long time to fix or that may cause you to rethink requirements and things like that. So if you're a quality engineer and you think your management is giving you bad, kind of incentives based on the metrics, there's good dialogues to have around this kind of stuff.
So there's a strong implicit assumption here, and I think I show in both columns, that once a bug is reported and fixed in quotes, it really is fixed in that field.
I wasn't assuming that.
Well,
Like I mentioned, you can have regressions. You can have bugs that don't get fixed, right?
okay, so, I'll tell you why I think
Okay.
I've heard that.
Uh-huh.
That's 100% of the test cases, I think we can all agree on that. 5-20% slices.
Mhm.
So there's 5-20% slices, and you said, at the last, I want to run the 100% test cases so that I can demonstrate that there are no bugs. And also, I have to say that as a QA manager, you show extraordinary confidence in the development. And I'm not sure extraordinary is really a strong enough word. And so I believe that just from the pattern, you have to believe that those bugs have been fixed first try.
Yeah, so this is definitely artificial. So the first thing is that, is there any reason to believe 6 builds is enough? No. And to your point, no. So if depends on how much code, depends on how good the developers are, it may not be enough, right? So you may not get to where all the bugs are fixed by there. Very artificial, but it's just meant to kind of draw these distinctions. Okay. All right, so that was kind of just to get the wheels turning a little bit after the sugar rush from the food. So let me dive into the whole thing about what does success mean for QA. And as I kind of alluded, I think it's a lot about building a culture and having that understood throughout the organization. And so that's 2 things. One is, what do we want to think of as our role in QA? And then the other is, what's our relationship with the different functional areas? Okay, so a little bit different than this, but again, I want it to be interactive. And this will just be voluntary, so I won't sort of go around and poll everybody, but just chime in on whatever topic you want. And again, these are no right answer. But the idea is it's a spectrum in each case, and it'll be from like 0 to 10. So it's just like how much you think it's one way versus the other, and it's like a bunch of different questions, okay? So just to kick it off, the first question that I find you face in QA is whether you're going to be centralized or decentralized, okay? Now, it used to be that there were, like maybe 20 years ago, I think it leaned towards decentralized because there wasn't a lot of strong QA management around. Just as a job function, there hadn't been people doing it for 20 years that were really good, and experienced at being senior managers. And so there was a temptation to have quality engineers report in through the development management chain. And then eventually, I think, as we progressed and learned about QA and that it really was a specialty and that there were, techniques and best practices, you saw everything kind of centralized. By the way, I didn't fess up to this early on, but I've been doing software for 32 years now. So I've seen a lot of change in the way that organizations are built. But I think beyond the notion of sort of the management chain, the introduction of Agile has brought another incentive to decentralize QA, because you've got this, these small Scrum teams or, whatever form of Agile that are supposedly self-managing, that can tailor what they're doing, to what works for the team. And so you typically have a ratio of, say, 2-to-1 to 4-to-1, somewhere in there, developers to QA. And so you tend to have a development manager pretty aligned with a Scrum team. But if there's a QA manager, they're probably spread across a few. And so again, it's tempting to just have, a couple quality engineers and a Scrum team report to the development manager and be coherent as a Scrum team. But I feel pretty strongly that it makes sense to centralize QA for 2 key reasons. And one is career path. So what I found is quality engineers reporting into development managers, it starts to look like your advancement path has to go into development. And again, I think at one time it was viewed as a natural evolution because there was no future in QA anyway and you had to go into development. But I think we've learned that's not the case. And back to my other thesis, that it's a personality thing. I know a lot of very good developers that decided to move to QA just because they like the style of work better. And that's a whole separate topic I could dive into, but won't. The other big reason to centralize QA is back to this identity thing. And what does success look like? And it takes some vision and some strategy to kind of have a coherent game plan among the quality team. And then also, so the rest of the organization understands it. So what I'm not going to really try to cover tonight is sort of how to do QA or how to do QA in an agile world. I mean, those are interesting topics, but they're whole other topics. And I'm also not going to try to get into, well, if we are doing the right thing here and the other part of the organization isn't, what's their fault, what's our fault. It's, again, I have opinions on that, but not going to go there. So it's more about, how to avoid all the traps that I meant. What is QA? And maybe you guys have faced this, maybe you've been lucky not to, but I've been in a lot of organizations that sort of view QA as a necessary evil. Like, well, we got to do it, but it slows things down. It forces us to do things in a process we wish we didn't have to do. And, even when it's good, it's an overhead, it's a cost, and it's not really getting us anything. And gee, couldn't the developers just write good code anyway? But I really think that QA done right is, something that's worth the investment. Obviously, probably most of the people in here do too. So the key is defining the playing field, I call it. So we should take charge and say, rather than the organization making up their minds what QA is or isn't, let's project, what we want to project and have a coherent view of what that is. And then you can also build measurements that say how well you're doing, because you want to be able to improve. Well, this is what we set out to do. Here's how we're doing. Okay, what do we need to change? And also so that you can sort of celebrate your victories and have the rest of the organization participate that, and be transparent about where you're not doing well. And if things aren't playing out well with the end result, it may be you need more people or more budget, which is also a tricky thing to lobby for in QA because it's hard to put numbers to what you're going to get. Okay, so let's kick it off. So overall, what role should QA play for the company? So here's 0, and here's 10. And on one end, you could say QA is like medicine. You're sick, you can get better if you invest in QA. And on the other end, it's a vitamin. Well, you're healthy, but you want to take vitamins to stay healthy. So if you had to pick a number on here where you said, I want to think of QA as either vitamins or medicine, or you could some kind of blend, 0 to 10. And anybody want to volunteer?
Could we say that 5 is like coffee?
You stumped me on that one.
Well, so here's why I'm trying to ground the scale. For some it's medicine, for some it's a vitamin, but for almost all, it sort of helps you get through the day, or your source of caffeine.
Think of it as, maybe if you're the CEO of an organization, like, gosh, if I put $1 million a year into development, I know I get some new functionality and some cool things, but if I put $500,000 into QA, what do I get? What, do I really have to spend that? And so he's like, well, I know I'm willing to spend a certain amount of money on vitamins. I know I should do it. It'll keep me healthy. And gosh, I really hope I'm not sick, but I'll probably have to take some medicine sometimes, right? Which way would you rather have the CEO think about it?
Time with, what's between those two influences.
Well, then I'm succeeding.
Maybe the data will tell us, right? Because if there's a clump around the midpoint, then maybe not.
Yeah.
Okay, so 8.
8? Okay. Why?
Because I think, for me, I'd like to see QA as a mode of operation rather than a role or an entity within an organization. Because I think it's got to become a developer's responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got to really buy into that. So I think it's a much more holistic thing.
Okay. That's interesting. I like the rationale behind it.
I'd say 0.
Okay. Why?
Because people are likely to pay any amount of money to save their life.
Mm-hmm.
And
I like that justification too.
Yeah.
So the other thing is I'm going to reserve my opinions kind of until we get some stuff on them. And again, there's not a right answer. I have opinions and I also have experience, right? That different companies that looked at it in different ways. So I'll throw out a couple ideas at the end. But so far I like both of the, they're very different, but I like them both. Any other ones?
I say
10?
10. Yeah.
Why?
From the initiation of a concept or any project, while you are planning whatever you are planning, you should think about verification. And the validation comes maybe in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you deal with verification and validation,
Mm-hmm.
you build the product right from the beginning, from the concept.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen successful projects from the initiation phase. So you better invest while you're investing on the development.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep.
So the way I see it is when you start, it's a vitamin, but when your product matures, it's a medicine. So when you have a startup, you don't know the requirement. So you have the code doing all this thing. So the product matures, your QA system, not the team or the system, the regressions, everything. It captures what the customer wants. Then after a point, you can throw away the code. You don't need the code. You can have a new code written in a new language, everything. But your system, which is measuring what the customer expects, that's the one it is capturing.
Mm-hmm.
So you start from one side. As your product matures, the QA becomes more and more critical. So that's where it becomes medicine.
I could get rigid and sort of force you to pick a number, but I'm not going to. I like your thinking. Actually, I like all these thinking so far. I don't know exactly how to capture that, but I'll just throw this out. One of the things too, again, as a sort of a QA budget champion, let's say, one of the things I've noticed is that upper management usually wants to just do things by ratio, right? QA, I want it to be 3-to-1. Every 3 developers is 1 QA. What I would say is the more mature the code is, the more QA you need relative to developers, because you've got a bunch of existing code. Only small amounts of change could risk a bunch of regression, and anyway, you've got to go make sure there isn't any. And it isn't so much you don't need testing early, it's that there's a lot more development work, right? So you can get away with a lower ratio there. You can keep the developers busy with fewer QA engineers. As it gets very mature, you need more, actually, which is sort of counterintuitive. So, which I think is kind of related to what you were saying. All right, well, the reason I like all the thought process here is I think ultimately you're going to be more successful as if you think of it as a vitamin and say, hey, we're just going to avoid the problems by doing it up front. But unquestionably, it's harder to sell, right? Because I had a friend in a company years ago, VP of sales. He used to say to me, look, this is how I came up with this question. He'd say, if you're in sales, you want to be selling medicine, not vitamins. They're both good things, but people have limited money. They're going to spend on medicine. They'll spend on vitamins if they have any left over, right? And I thought about that and like, wow, that's really true, but it's kind of unfortunate. So the trick, yeah?
Actually, there is a new philosophy nowadays, is only sick people need medicine, healthy people need vitamins,
Mm-hmm.
more healthy people, you can actually sell
Yep.
vitamins.
No, that's kind of the crux of this, right? It's absolutely true. If you're, again, there's no right answer here, and it depends on the organization, right? That's one of the other big things. I didn't say this, but how you decide or want to influence what the role of QA is depends on your organization, the stage, the maturity of it. And I don't mean just, functional maturity. It's like how mature is the product, versus other trade-offs you have to make. And these are all things to take into account. But if you have an organization that says, we're willing to invest in order to avoid problems, and you guys all know the standard thing, like it's more costly to fix problems after they're in than to avoid them up front, right? So clearly, if you can do this, and if you can find ways to justify the investment, it's better. But it's harder, right? And what I would say is you don't want to be the nag, always going in saying, you should invest more up front, because it's very difficult to prove the investment paid off. So this, the point here is that you're going to have to be in line with company philosophy. I would say advocate for this, but you're going to have to probably, be flexible and adjust to the culture.
One of the things I like about vitamins is it is preventative.
Yep.
And so if you think about medicine, this is after the fact, this is like you look at all these post-release bugs and you're saying, oh, now we need QA.
Yeah.
It's too late.
No question. But now I'll throw in another one. So I was in the early stage startup, 8 people, right? And you've got X amount of first round financing. It was all about, hey, it'd be nice to fix all the bugs now, but if we don't have a product, we're not going to get the next round of financing, let alone sales, right? Mm-hmm. So we just got to have a credible demo that gets a few, customers that are telling us what they like and don't like about it. At that point, you might say, hey, you know what? We're willing to fix it later. We'll take our medicine later because when we can afford it right now, we may not have the chance to get there if we invest too much up front, right? I had a hard time with that, by the way. I'm very much on this end, my orientation. And it took me a while to go, yeah, I guess, if we have no funding, we won't be here, so we've got to sort of make trade-offs. So some of these things will come up too in some of the other questions. In fact, let's get on to the next one. So on this end, again, this is how do you want other people to think of QA and how do you want to think of yourselves? Is QA the gatekeeper? Or, what word did I use here? Call it information provider. So this means, do you have the final say? Thumbs up or thumbs down? This is ready for production or it's not. Or you're like, hey, I just report the bugs. You guys decide. You make a business decision, right? Any thoughts on this one? I use this one as an interview question.
So better be the gatekeeper instead of information provider. Information providing would not lead to any benefit because you will be burning your hands. Like, once the product is out, it's out, and it's very tough to fix after it goes out. So being a gatekeeper from the beginning of the initiation phase, that will at least arrest the issues, design flaws, bugs, whatever.
Okay. So you're saying
gatekeeper is better than information provider. But what are we achieving being an information provider? Hey, you have this issue, then what? If it goes to the client, then we are nowhere.
I'm going to make sure that I come back and answer your question at the end, but I don't want to tilt it now.
I'm justifying mine now.
So you're saying like somewhere over
Be a
here,
gatekeeper. Yeah.
0?
Yeah, I'm going closer to the information provider because I think you can't be in a cycle where the development team continue to write buggy code and then you find it and you stop things and then they fix it. There's got to be some process there where things get better as you go along. I think being the gatekeeper, it gives you a very negative connotation because everybody wants the code out.
Mm-hmm.
So you become the guys that stop that going out. So
Mm-hmm.
it's very easy for you to become isolated.
Okay.
So I think the education is more important because then you actually change the behavior in development.
Okay.
I would say maybe 9 or 10 on your scale. I think we've evolved to this more modern idea of management, and that is if people want to do the right thing, you just need to give them the opportunity to do the right thing. And in historical management, you would have needed QA to be the gatekeeper to prevent them from doing the wrong thing. It's a very different view of what you can expect from your team.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I would say between like 8 and 9 because you have to provide like basic information to the management that this needs to be like go to the production or not. But it also depends like how much critical bugs you found. Like if you have like critical bugs over there, like lot many, then you should be a good gatekeeper. You should simply say that this bug should not be go out. So if the bugs are like normal, that can be like built in, like fixed in the next build, so it should be.
Okay. You guys have very good thoughts about this stuff, and I like that there's some on both sides, because again, there's no right answers here. Now, I'll ask this question.
Before you go,
Yep,
who's hired?
sorry?
You said this is an interview question. Who got the job?
Oh. So I do this a little bit different in an interview,
All right.
because I iterate on it, but I'll tell you what I ultimately do is I say this is the wrong question to ask. Because, well, I'll get to that in a minute. I have a later question that's, I think, the right one to ask. But I do think this is a good question, not for a quality engineer, but for, again, this building the culture of the team. In Agile philosophy, which way do you think the sort of philosophical gurus would lean? This way, right? Okay. And the reason why is because everything's a team decision, right? They don't want to have sort of one member of the team deciding. It should be everybody's on the same page. Now, I'll tell you what's wrong with that. Again, so I could argue good or bad about this and good or bad about this. And in fact, that's a lot of what I think is interesting, right? So I don't know the right answer here, and it's going to depend. But it's somewhere in the middle. And the problem is ownership. If you just do this, there's nobody that's kind of the, one throat to choke. They like to say, like, well, if something went wrong, who do I go to find out why? Or make sure we don't do it, the next time. And yeah, the whole Agile philosophy, the team, continuous improvement, they're going to figure it out. But ultimately, there's one developer that owns the line of code that they changed, right? And I think it's good to have somebody that owns the quality piece, especially if you've got a central QA organization, so that you can ensure that somebody comes to work every day trying to figure this stuff out solely, right? So if you want quality, you have to have some of this, but you don't want to be in the position of being the speed bump. Because then the question is, what's the criteria? What criteria are you using to say it's ready to go or not? And typically in QA, there's no incentive to say yes. Only bad things can happen for saying yes, right? Yep, ship it. Oh, there was a bug. Well, you screwed up, right? So there's too much incentive to say no. And then there's too much incentive for everybody else to figure out how to get around you. Because their objective is to get stuff out, and somebody was saying this, right? So this is really, really good from the ownership standpoint. So I think, probably I can go with this. I might go a little bit more over this way, but probably on this side of it these days, especially in an Agile world. Because you do want to get the team involvement. If you're providing information, I could launch into, what I think all the information is, but again, we have limited time, and so I'm going to kind of stick to the culture piece. But okay, one more question sort of for the overall QA approach. What's the best way for QA to attract and retain top talent? You can sort of make a pitch to candidates, and you can say, hey, this is a great way to get into development. Training ground for dev. Or you can say, we've got a great QA career path. So this is just how do we attract the best QA talent and retain them. Okay. Anybody doesn't think 10? Okay. What if you have a really strong quality engineer and they say, I want to go into development? Should be okay? All right. So when you're recruiting people, if you portray this too much, those people might not want to join. Right? So what I usually do when I'm trying to attract quality engineers, I'll sell on this, right? And I'll say very explicitly, somewhere down the line, if you want to get into development, great. Good for you. But I'll bet I can make it so interesting you won't want to, right? And here's why. Because here's all the interesting things you can do in QA, especially if it's centralized, right? Because then you can get people collaborating together. You can have sort of QA architecture. You can have specialists in different areas. I don't want to preload some of the other questions too much, but it has a lot to do with what role are we going to play in relationship to the other parts of the org? How much prestige do we have? How much importance do we have to the organization? Okay, so those first three questions, however you decide to answer them, should give you a little bit of a picture of how do we think of ourselves in QA. You know, and I think this is important. It's like, hey, I don't have to apologize for hiring you into QA, right? There's a great career path here. It's going to be interesting work. It's valuable to the company, right? And then you have to understand, is the company going to be willing to invest in vitamins and say, yes, we want to do QA because it's going to save us headaches down the road, or not, in which case you better align with that, right? Say, okay, if it's medicine, then we're going to be really good at, you know, getting cured, right? Okay, so let's talk about relationship with other parts of the org. Anybody want to say anything about this before we go? Hmm?
Don't erase this.
Okay,
Yeah.
too late.
I'm in a I'm trying a new approach in my organization. Luckily, I'm implementing it now. I don't want to take much time, but what I'm doing is I'm training the manual testers and the developers to get into the mode of automation, execution, and then automating. So instead of like developers building their own white box tools and manual testers doing their own manual testing, we try to come into a middle field where we say that, okay, we know partial automation, we know partial development, and we know partial manual testing. So that's blending in.
Mm-hmm.
So I see some success. So on this scale, I stay on 5 because training the developers and training the manual testers would help the QA process to improve from both the ends.
Mm-hmm.
Developers are seeing from the bug perspective, testers are seeing from the development perspective. So there is a common ground.
Yep, I think it's a good point. Somebody else wanted to say something? Or?
I actually had a question from a little bit earlier.
Uh-huh.
So you talked about centralized QA organization, which maybe I'll call QMO in deference to PMO.
Okay.
And then you talked about, and I think we all know that we'd like to have our Agile team be cross-functional and durable and stable and all that other stuff. So how does that work? You take a couple of people from the QMO, you assign them to the team, but you never get them back. Why do you say never get them back? Because the Agile team is supposed to be long-lived.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it is a challenge. Now, so again, I could go really far afield with this about how to do QA in an Agile world. When I was at Intuit recently, they have a very rigid idea of how to do Agile, and one thing is about team size. You read the, you know, it's sort of the 2 pizza thing, right? 7 plus or minus 2 is what they said, so 5 to 9. And the division I was in, they're very divisionalized, had a firm thing of 3 to 1 is the ratio we want quality engineers. So I said, hey, look, you do the math, that means you're going to have a lot of times 1 quality engineer, at most 2 in any Scrum team. So you've got a vulnerability problem there, right? So if you spend a long, long time, everybody's in one team, and that's all you know, and only 1, maybe 2 QA engineers. If you lose that person, or they're sick, or they're on vacation, you're in trouble. So you need some cross-pollination, and I think you actually need somewhat larger Scrum teams than that in an ideal world. Again, this is getting a little bit far afield. But bottom line is you should have QA management that is discussing these things and saying, how long is good to be durable versus getting stagnant and getting too dependent on individuals embedded in teams. We also had consultants that had been there 5 years and were in a Scrum team and couldn't let them go because we had nobody else to move in, and you know, things would fall on the floor if they left suddenly. Not a good place to be. So again, I don't have the perfect answer, but I don't think you want a completely static assignment. Plus, the other typical thing I found is that the amount of work in one section of code goes up and down sort of over time, and so you want to flex a little bit how the teams are defined and how many people are in each one. And the QA management should be in there looking at, resource allocation. Career development is the other part of it, right? Because typically, if I'm a quality engineer and I'm doing the same thing over and over on the same code for year after year, I'm asking, where is my career going? And as much as you might think it's a good thing for the team, if in order to change, they need to change companies, that's not going to be good either. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, so those challenges aren't specific to the QA role.
Right.
I think I would hope that as time goes on, the stable team is working on harder problems or problems that remain interesting, and so the whole team is working on problems that remain interesting. The other question that is bothering me is, what is the role of the QA person? So I feel like I hear you saying they design tests and write tests.
Yeah, I actually haven't talked about that too much. In fact, it's a great segue, because the next thing I want to talk about is relationship to the development function. So maybe we dive into the interaction with other functions that'll touch on that. Yeah, but I will say, again, up front, I'm not going to try and say how to do QA well here, but it's more about just thinking about how to position the role and the function. So let's start with this one. Quality engineers in Scrum teams, what's the relationship or sort of the attitude you want to have in interacting with your development partners? Are you a teammate? You're probably asking, okay, I'm all for that one, whatever the other one is. Let's call this one loyal opposition. My favorite reaction to these is confused looks on people's faces.
I almost think they could be the same.
Mm-hmm. They could, but again, if you had to say these are two choices.
Both at the same time.
You could say 5. I mean, 5, okay.
Between, means it depends what you're interacting with.
Uh-huh.
You said opposition, but you said loyal opposition.
Yeah.
So that's really implying, because you want to be opposition, but again you're not in front.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has the same ultimate goal, right? So you wouldn't want to say opponent, for example. I think everybody would vote against that one.
Yeah, softly saying no.
Positively.
Crazy.
So you're leaning up in this direction then? Okay. Any other thoughts? 5?
5.
Another 5? 8, okay. That's interesting. So my comment on this is, again, in my experience over the industry, 25 years ago, it was way over here. In fact, there was this rule of thumb that the more you knew about what development was doing, the more polluted your thinking got about testing, because everybody thought a lot more black box back then, right? Oh, if I know the inner workings, then I'll be influenced on how I test it, And over time, it's steadily gone this direction. And again, Agile pushes towards this, right? Which again, I don't think Agile is magic, right? I think there's good things about it. There's other challenges it brings up. If you ask me, I'd probably go somewhere over here. Not all the way, but the more you work together, the more you can do, as long as you're aligned on the goals. You don't want to go all the way. You don't want to be completely in bed, because at the end of the day, you kind of got to say, I don't believe you. You're saying you have no bugs. I don't believe you, right? So you're my buddy, but I'm just going to check, right? But the reason I say closer to teammate is because you should be able to go to the developer and have a question like, where do you think this might break if it was going to break? And have them not feel threatened to give you a truthful answer, right? And, well, what have you really tested already? So I don't cover the same ground and, know what's already probably in good shape. And this also gets to how you're perceived, by the rest of the organization, because, again, everybody wants to get stuff out, right? So if you're too much over here, then it's how do we get over, around, under you guys, right?
So
Okay.
do you think QA is about finding bugs or preventing them?
I think that's actually a great question. I think QA is about how you get to good quality as fast as possible. So it can be all of the above and what you talked about. The reason I don't think you want to be the obstacle is because that sounds like, oh, you're trying to slow me down. And what my experience has been is you don't want to be perceived by the rest of the organization as a hurdle, something to slow it down, where you want to say, I'm here to speed things up. Now, we all know we can't speed things up to the point where we get lousy product, so I'm here to tell you how to get to good quality fast and then to verify that we're doing that. So I think you should have that expertise, best practices, how we can get there, and then how are you going to verify it. Okay. This is great, by the way. I mean, this is a really good discussion on this stuff, and I like the diversity of thought. All right, so next thing in terms of, well, this kind of gets to what we just talked about. So I call it, so again, this is relationship with development. Is QA the enforcer or the evangelist? We might be able to skip this one because we just talked about it. I accidentally jumped ahead. I would come squarely right in the middle on this one because I do think it's both, right? So, see a lot of nodding heads, so this probably isn't very controversial, but yeah.
Isn't this the same as the medicine vitamin?
I don't think so. Not exactly, because the medicine and vitamin I think is more about, justification for investment, right? Well, we're not going to do this unless we're sick, or, oh, we're going to do this because we think it gives us a competitive advantage up front. This one is more about, well, okay.
Process got to be followed here.
Yeah, and also just, it sets an expectation about the working relationship between an individual developer and a quality engineer. So here's another example from my, experience. I was at eBay. When I first joined eBay, they were very metric driven. So I don't know if you guys know the history of eBay. Meg Whitman came from consulting and everything. She was just about metrics and process, right? And they were kind of gradually, she did a lot of good things building the business, but engineering-wise, they were undoing a lot of stuff that had gotten in place there. See if I can remember this. So QA engineers had a metric that was what fraction of the bugs that you report actually wind up needing a fix. So they're trying to punish quality engineers for spurious bug reports, basically, or nits, right? The developers were measured by the opposite. It was basically, well, it wasn't the fraction, it was how many bugs do you have that required a fix, that require an actual fix. So over time, these people were being great teammates, and they sort of evolved as though, here's the question, is QA, what's QA's role if those are the metrics? Well, you're kind of the enforcer, but you're being measured by how well you do it, right? So what happened is you had these buddies, developers and QA engineers had great relationships, so they would sit down and negotiate which bugs to actually document so that the metrics came out good for both, right? I mean, it was really dysfunctional. First thing we went, just get rid of these metrics. Like, just, I joined, I was like, ugh, they're gone immediately, And so if it's too much towards this, you get that kind of weird behavior, And again, I mean, these are people, right? You're a quality engineer. You don't want to always be the bad guy. You don't want to always be the person everybody hates because you're stopping things from happening or telling on somebody that did a bug, right? So it's a fine line. But, evangelizing best practices, so hey, how do we build in quality in the first place? How do we avoid, all this stuff? But, trust and verify. You're great, you're my buddy, I'm just going to double check, right? And oh, by the way, The other thing that I think is good is not to sort of beat up development for not doing a good job, but it's to give out, praise and awards for the developers that do good things, right? So that's another cultural thing to establish. I think QA should be giving out awards for good development work, as opposed to always just reporting bugs. Okay, so let's talk about product management or product owners. I think we're actually doing okay on time. So now, you could say, well, QA should start up front with the requirements. So, what role should QA play with the product owner on requirements? Should QA be a contributor or I'll say like reviewer / interpreter? Let me clarify this a little bit. So oftentimes requirements are more from the business side. Hey, we need this function. You might say, well, what we should do is come back with the perspective of the user and interpret what that really means in terms of, hey, is this working the way it's supposed to or not? Yes, it's meeting the business objective. Well, it's not really that end, but is it meeting the business objective but not making happy users? So that would be what a kind of what I mean by interpreter. On this side, it's more like, hey, I'm going to, I want certain things built this way already to help me test or whatever. Right? Anytime I talk, I feel like I'm slanting things one way or the other. But any thoughts on this one? 10. Okay. 8.
We have the system where the support team also acts as a QA.
Okay.
So when the support team acts as a QA, support team talks to the customer, they are also contributor and as an interpreter side for this specific, not applied to every organization. I put 5.
5. Okay. Did you?
I said 3.
3. Okay. By the way, is anybody else getting warm in here? Is the air maybe off? Okay. I know after hours sometimes it automatically goes off. Any other thoughts on this one?
I would say
Sorry?
I would say 8.
Okay.
Deference to the team and invest for quality stories.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Were you going to say that?
I should stick with 5.
Okay.
You are a person. Your job is not only reviewing and reporting. At the same time, you should contribute. Okay, what went wrong? Why did it went wrong?
Mm-hmm.
How can it be corrected? What are the measures being taken?
Mm-hmm.
What are the lessons learned from our earlier? So that's why I stick with 5.
Okay.
What if there is no earlier product and this is the first phase of the product? This is the first phase of the product. There is no reviews for similar things.
Yeah. See, for that, lessons learned would not be applicable, but in the end, QA person just can sit there and say, okay, I'll just review you for your file. And we can do that.
You can contribute it, right? Like as a requirement, it's a business side actually. So if there is a change in request work from the business side, it has to come from the business side. There is a change in requirement, and accordingly the QA should get involved in this.
From the initiation phase, like even there is a change in the requirements as well. You should have the discussions with the business team and see what they are planning to change and what will be the implication. So we need to go to that level and have the discussions. So that's why you need to be a contributor. And once we get the requirements, updates,
Right.
then we need to be a reviewer. So it's
It depends on
50-50.
the roles, but if the product don't have the earlier phase or first time the product is getting released, then this won't be applicable.
Yeah, I think so. Specifically talking about Agile, I mean, so I think you're getting kind of to a good point, which is that you don't want to do the job of the product owner. right? So at the end of the day, they have to say, what is it we're trying to achieve here from a business perspective? And hopefully they're taking, the users into account. One of the things I would say is that if you're going to test something, if there's anybody in the organization that really, really, really needs to know exactly what the requirements are, it's QA. Because you need to say, is this working the way it's supposed to or not, right? And oftentimes, there's a lot of ambiguity when you get the requirements, like, well, okay. I mean, this is a very common thing. You guys probably run into this. Developer gets requirements, codes it up. Tester, no, this is wrong. Goes to the developer, says, nope, I did it just the way the requirement said. You're like, no, you didn't, right? You're getting two different interpretations of the requirements. That's a bad place to be, because guess what? You already invested a bunch of time in test automation, code development, for the product. So you probably want to be something of a contributor. So, you want to review and interpret, but that's somewhat after the fact. You probably want to say, hey, look, we need to know in this degree of detail, right? Like, no, this is too ambiguous. We need to put more stuff in here, right? About, that's great, you want to have this business function, but how is it actually going to operate? The other big thing that I've run into with Agile in particular is there's a risk that things can get siloed into functional areas of the product. And there's a role to be played in contributing from a kind of end-to-end perspective. How consistent are these requirements with other parts of the product that this product owner may not really be familiar with or work with day to day? QA oftentimes has a better perspective, and one of the things that I like to do, if the size of the team justifies it, kind of back to resource allocation and a centralized QA team, I don't like to have everybody in a Scrum team. I like to have a few people that are sort of end-to-end, looking more from a business analyst point of view, or user experience, human factors kind of thing. Sometimes, work with a user experience group to say, hey, what are the consistent things that we want to have in terms of behavior across all the functional areas of the product, and then, kind of review and contribute. So in addition, you've got testability. How easy is it going to be to automate this stuff? Do we want to have, so as an Intuit, we were completely redoing our, all the APIs for the services. So one of the things we were able to get in was a flag that said this is a test transaction. How great is that? Like, especially when, it's a payment service, right? So you can test without actually moving money because it's flagged right in there. You've got a flag in the template for this is a test transaction, and you can key off of that in,
How do you know it works?
How do you know it works?
Yeah, you just perverted the test data, right? You're supposed to QA the thing in a way that the customer's going to use it. You've just violated that from the start.
It depends on how you use it. So it's just a flag, right?
Yeah.
And it means that, so the way we used it is that you could put a simulator in at a place where you would go out to an external service and it would catch that and say, yep, you have to test that too, right?
I'm not a fan.
Yeah, okay.
And I worked in the stock market
Yeah.
trading systems for many years. The stock markets provide you with test symbol, the clever ones, and you can actually buy 1 million shares of test one.
Mm-hmm.
And then at least you have a real end-to-end test.
Yeah. So this is a little fun little game for you guys. Go onto eBay sometimes, and you can just search for any product. Search for do not buy. There's a bunch of listings on there for things that you can't actually buy their test, but just visible to everybody. So, the question is, and this we wrestled with this because I was actually advocating for, hey, why don't we put a flag in there so those don't show up unless you have a certain account that's flagged as a test account. You have a perfectly valid argument there. Well, that now adds complexity to the code. What if it doesn't work right? So there's pros and cons.
I agree with you.
Yeah. So all I can say is that in our particular case with the payments, it was very, very painful to get test transactions with the external services. You could only, in fact, they put a limit on it. So you actually had to basically